Steelers win it 38-29 over the Philadelphia Eagles in the Battle of Pennsylvania. I'm Matt Gajtka. This is Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm coming to you from my home studio, but I want to throw it down to Heinz Field where Mike Asti is live on the rotunda. Gotta love that. Very authentic backdrop. We have Mount Washington. We have the fall foliage starting to peek out. And Mike, for the first time since 1979, the Pittsburgh Steelers are 4-0. So football season, a sure sign of fall, but we don't get this type of a look from the Steelers very often. Odd to think about that they haven't gone through the first quarter of a season undefeated since the end of the Super Steelers era. So a rarity for sure. And lining up with the rest of this season so far, at least the first 4 games, not easy, as the Steelers had to fend off a furious Philadelphia rally in the second half. The secondary not necessarily holding up its end of the bargain, all the hype about the defense coming into the season. But again, Mike, it was the offense that came through. Chase Claypool, 4 touchdowns, 3 of them receiving, 1 rushing, and Ben Roethlisberger, another very efficient performance in his return from that offseason elbow surgery.
Yeah, the Steelers are 4-0 for the first time since 1979. That's kind of a mind-blowing fact when you think about all of the years of success, and of course a little bit of average decade in the 1980s for the Steelers. They had that slump a little bit before Bill Cowher, but then a contender through the 90s, certainly a contender through the 2000s, not to the level of some dynasties certainly, but championships were won there by Bill Cowher and Mike Tomlin. So to say this is the first season that they start 4-0, and that does include the little hiccup with that game against Tennessee that was not played, a game that I actually thought the Steelers could have won and were going to be favored to win, even though the Titans were also 3-0. So really, we could be sitting here right now talking about this Steeler team being 5-0, as amazing as that is to think. But yeah, this is a Steeler team that played well enough to win. This is a Steeler team that's offense finally exploded. And I think, honestly, Matt, we would be absolutely remiss if we didn't talk frequently about Chase Claypool, who – I covered 9 hours of Jap Show coverage. That was before you joined us here at the Now Network as myself, Alan, and the boys, and I was hosting it. We did a gauntlet for those quarantine 2 or 3 days of draft coverage. And Chase Claypool was drafted behind 10 other receivers in the National Football League. There were 10 other receivers who were drafted ahead of him. As mind-blowing as that is also, the first rookie in Steelers franchise history with 4 touchdowns in a game, 1 rushing and 3 as a receiver, does get over 100 yards receiving, and just such an impactful player throughout this entire year. That perfect Steelers mold with the physicality, but also able to take the top off the defense, a Notre Dame product that, myself included, I don't think anyone thought we'd see this from him right away. Certainly thought he was talented, certainly thought it was a solid draft pick, but he wasn't like Mims and a few others. He wasn't that guy the national media was salivating over. Managed to have just an impressive performance, to say the least, with a record-setting day for rookies to Chase Claypool. And then they did have to hang on towards the end. So you mentioned the defense. The offense explodes. Clearly the offense can put up points. I would say a concern here moving forward, as this team certainly feels it can win a championship, is the defense. The defense coming in the season with a lot of hype, tons of talent around this defense. They got a lot in terms of the pass rush on Carson Wentz early on, but they did falter in the secondary later on in this game, allowing the Eagles to come back. The Steelers able to hang on and get the win, but it wasn't the dominating performance that I think many would have liked or the way this game began, especially, Matt, when you think of the fact, to be fair, this is an Eagles team and a Carson Wentz and an Eagles offense that is riddled with injuries. Deshaun Jackson and company not there. All of his weapons, his Chase Claypool like players, not there in this game. So he's doing it undermanned against that Steelers pass rush and still able to put up 29 points against that Steelers defense, with a lot of those coming late in the game. But the Steelers do hang on and get the victory, most in part thanks to a record-setting performance by the stud that is Chase Claypool.
Well, you mentioned it, Carson Wentz. A nice job for a guy who maybe not on the outs in Philadelphia, but
right.
The luster is gone from Carson Wentz right now, and the Eagles fans are sinking their teeth into him. So I thought pretty darn good today, including hooking up with Travis Fulgham over and over and over again, the Old Dominion product. How about that? He really came to the forefront. 6th-round pick of the Lions last year. Today, 152 receiving yards, 10 receptions in all, 1 receiving touchdown. The Steelers couldn't find him. They couldn't cover him, apparently, today. But Fortunately for them, the Eagles had the same troubles with Mr. Chase Claypool, 7 receptions for 110 yards, also averaging about 15 yards per catch. And I loved how they got him involved in some of those gadget plays, some of those college-like plays, if you will, there, Mike. I realize that a lot of that has filtered to the NFL for years now, but the offense was actually fun to watch today, outside of maybe that 1 second and 22 play call late in the fourth quarter after the dubious offensive pass interference against Chase Claypool. We'll get to bad officiating in a moment, believe me. But I really felt like it was a good day for Randy Fichtner and the offense in terms of creativity and keeping the Eagles guessing. What do you think about that from on site?
I think the reason why you were entertained by watching the Steelers today, and they've scored tons of points in years past, even years that had disappointing finishes, like that last year with Todd Haley, the offense scored points. They put up points throughout the years. It's been a long time now with Ben Roethlisberger in this offense, putting up points no matter who his weapons are. But the difference this year, and I think it was most evident today and kind of what you're alluding to, yes, Randy Fichtner had a solid day. Yes, Chase Claypool had a record-setting performance. Ben Roethlisberger had a solid day, not doing tons, but managing this game and finding those weapons and diversifying the offense. But Matt Canada, a man who shares your name that is recently from the college ranks, that's why you're thinking to yourself, this is a college offense. He was brought in to be a quarterback's coach, and many would think, well, this is a veteran quarterback that doesn't normally necessarily have great relationships with coaches throughout the years. Why do you need a quarterback's coach who's a veteran? It's almost like a co-offensive coordinator situation. This could go awry. Well, Ben has said he loves him. Randy Fichtner and him seem to be getting along. And Matt Canada was brought in to bring a lot of what he did in the college game, whether it be at Pitt or Maryland, to the Steelers and improve the Steelers offense with those college-like kinks. We saw a lot of that in this game, more than the other games this year. And I actually talked about this on the last Steelers postgame show. When are we really going to see why Matt Canada was brought to this team? When are we going to let him have the leash taken away and open up that playbook and see some of the Matt Canada plays in there? I feel like we hadn't seen that to this point that I'm seeing in practice when they send me these clips. We saw that today, and we saw that in particular with Chase Claypool, especially with that touchdown run of his. That was a college-like play. So I think Matt Canada really emerged in this game. And Matt, as you know, it's now going to be interesting how much they can incorporate Matt Canada and his gadget-like college plays throughout the season. Because, of course, the Wildcat and other college-like plays, they usually are fun and last maybe 4 or 5 weeks. Maybe if you're lucky and you have an all-pro player, it might last the full season. But eventually these smart NFL caliber defenses scheme and can figure those out. So now that the kitchen sink has been unlocked a little bit with Fichtner and Matt Canada, it is interesting to me how much longer Matt Canada can be involved to the way he was today, or he needs to get back to work because defenses are going to scheme against him in particular. Because it was a unique Steelers offense. Wow, a great Steelers offense, and maybe one of the most entertaining performances by a Steelers offense in a while.
I did enjoy it, and like I said, I don't want to stereotype college plays versus pro plays versus high school plays. Heck, all that goes up and down the chain. I get what you're meaning, though. Yeah. But you're right. The type of look to the offense was more collegiate, if you will, more type of a spread situation there. Some of the stuff that we've seen that will keep defenses guessing. So I hope we do see more of it. Also instructive to realize here, Mike, there was no preseason. This is game number 4. Yeah. The Steelers are coming off a bye week. So essentially this is right around the end of the preseason in terms of reps. Now I know the first team's gotten more reps because they've played the entirety of the 4 games. But I think overall, it's a pretty decent comparison. Maybe compare it to 1 or 2 games into a typical season. And you throw in the fact that the Steelers were all thrown off by the postponement of the Titans game. So I'm really satisfied with the offensive performance today. And it goes back to the scouting of Claypool. It goes back to Ben Roethlisberger being open to this sort of thing. And it fits for an upper 30s quarterback who has just had elbow surgery that he might want to limit some of those big throws downfield. It adds up. And I think we're seeing a maturity from Roethlisberger and from Randy Fichtner, too, to be open to these ideas. So I remember you talking about when we're going to see some of these plays come in. So we are now starting
to throw them in there.
Now we're starting to see them germinate, these ideas germinate into actual results on the field. So that's promising. Steelers win it 38-29. If you're just joining us here on the YouTube feed live, this is Pittsburgh Postgame, the Steelers edition, our first in a couple of weeks due to the COVID postponement last week. I'm Matt Gajtka with Mike Asti. Mike's live from Heinz Field, as you can probably tell there, in one of those signature rotundas on the Ohio River, right near the point. Mike, on the defensive side, we got to go there next because this had the feel of that Denver Broncos game 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, I think, at this point. Second game of the season, I'll put it that way.
It all blends together.
I don't know when it was. It happened this year, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. But in that situation, the Broncos had to go to a backup quarterback, so a little different there. They changed some things in how they did it. But I was concerned about primarily, actually, not necessarily the coverage ability of the secondary, which was an issue, but in the second half, I'm not sure if it was what the Eagles were doing or what the Steelers weren't doing, but they weren't getting to Carson Wentz at all. And the few opportunities they did get in his kitchen there, he made them miss. So some credit to him, some credit to the offensive line. I wonder what the Steelers could have done in terms of scheme to maybe mix it up. So do you have any thoughts on that and how they might avoid a scary situation? The Eagles could have easily taken the lead. That 57-yard field goal attempt just drifted about a foot wide of the right upright with, 3 minutes to go? So this could have easily been a loss, and it would have been a head-scratcher for sure.
It would have been a head-scratcher, and if it was a loss, the defense would have taken tons of criticism, like another team that plays in Pittsburgh that just suffered a loss this weekend to end their hot start to a season. As Pitt started 3-0 and now it's 3-2. This defense has tons of talent. This defense has tons of hype. Think about this, Matt. Name me another team, and this is just rhetorical, I'm not asking you a question here, but name me another team that has multiple players that legitimately can and maybe should win Defensive Player of the Year individually this year. The Steelers have multiple. They have TJ Watt, who right now probably is the leader. Maybe that might have dissipated today, but probably was the leader going into the Tennessee game. Minkah Fitzpatrick, off of the record-setting performance that he had last season, can also be that guy. Granted, they are neutralizing him a little bit more this year than he was last year, more under the radar last year. This year, defensive scheme or offenses trying to get rid of him. So that was going to be a factor. But still, this is a veteran team with tons of talent defensively, and you have a quarterback that is missing his weapons. I did see it, to me, as early in this game, it felt like the Steelers were getting to Carson Wentz, rushing his throws a little bit. They weren't necessarily getting sacks, but he was throwing it sooner than he had to. It almost appeared in his mind he was worried about the Steelers' pass rush. As the game continued on, it appeared Carson Wentz kind of figured it out and said, okay, this is how it's going to go. I don't have Deshaun Jackson here to take the top off the defense, but if I turn into Brady on the Patriots here and can dink and dunk my way down the field, I can do it against this pass rush because they're not really bringing the heat as much maybe as I thought they would have. That was odd. They weren't really able to be that sack machine we're used to. And I think also, Matt, the other issue is the secondary. There were open receivers for the Eagles in the red zone in particular. And even with all the talent and all the hype coming into the season for the Steelers defense, the one part of the defense that maybe could have been that concern was the Steelers secondary. It seems like every year that's kind of a concern with the exception of the takeaways from last year, but you're not going to get that many as you did last year again this season. You can't figure that. And it just allowed Carson Wentz to kind of march up and down the field. Even after it appeared Carson Wentz got hurt in this game, it almost really mirrored the Broncos game because he was kind of rubbing his elbow on a couple of those what could have been sack plays. He did leave the game for a play or two. So maybe they could have lost him. But I got to tell you, Matt, while the headlines are going to read Steelers' first 4 no starts since 1979, while you see those national broadcasts, I'm sure, on the game feed you watch there from Fox with the graphics of Troy Polamalu with Defensive Player of the Year the last time they were even 3-0. I don't know if they actually got the age correct with Juju, but they claimed he was a freshman in high school. Maybe he was in 8th grade, but regardless, that's the situation for the last time the Steelers were even 3-0 in a year. There's still concerns about making this a championship season. There's still concerns about winning the division. There's still concerns in a competition against the Chiefs and the Ravens, who are both winning franchises with MVPs and younger and playing very, very well as well. So the standard for the Steelers is very, very high normally. But I think certainly this year with the talent that's there, I predicted them to win the division. But for that to happen, they will have to pick it up on defense. And this would have been a disaster if they would have lost this game. I think it would have actually been a better loss to lose to Tennessee than to this Eagles team because of all the injuries this Eagles team is dealing with. Because Carson Wentz, who started his career as an All-Pro, as an MVP candidate, you have to remember he's going to wear a ring forever, but that ring was won in the playoffs by Nick Foles, not by him. So he has tons of pressure around Philadelphia fans and just to get back into favor. But granted, his offensive line is beat up. The weapons aren't there. This isn't a healthy Eagles team who's going to win, really. So to lose this versus losing to a Titan team that was an undefeated 3-0 playoff team, that would have been a little bit better in terms of pill to swallow. And this would have been a really, really bad loss where talk radio would have went wild if the Steelers would have blew this game. They do win it, though, so we can talk optimistically. But the defense is still on the hook. The defense is going to need to play better, I'm sure.
To that point, the Eagles went 10 for 14 on third down, including 10 conversions in a row at a certain point there until that second-to-last drive they had that led to the missed field goal attempt that I brought up a moment ago. So if you want to point to something, maybe point to that. Dave Gormley has a comment on our live feed saying that the team he felt, or the defense looked fatigued at points. Maybe they need a liberal rotation of players to get some fresh legs in there. Not sure about that, but I do know that third down was clearly an issue there, and a lot of times that does come down to pass rush and secondary, right? Because it's mostly going to be a passing play on third down in the modern NFL. Wes M says the Steelers are going to struggle against a good team like the Ravens or the Chiefs. Well, I would think so. I think most teams, or if not all teams, are going to struggle against good teams.
They are the
like,
top two teams in the league,
Ravens and the Chiefs. But thank you for that input as well. As we look ahead to the upcoming schedule, it's going to get more difficult here, Mike. Cleveland comes in. They're 3-1 playing right now, of course. So the Browns are rejuvenated, then at Tennessee in that rescheduled game before November starts with at Baltimore and at Dallas. So we've talked all season about the early portion being an opportunity, early portion of the schedule, that is, an opportunity for the Steelers to get right and get their feet under them. I would have to say mission accomplished, even though there are points to improve on the defensive side more than the offensive side. But I want to talk to you about officiating right now, usually the third rail that I am hesitant to talk about too much, because what do you say, right? Not like we can go out there and fix the officiating, but it's a talking point here. For the fourth consecutive week, the Steelers' defense, with great pass rushers like Watt and Dupree, et cetera, they do not draw a single offensive offensive holding call against the offensive line of the opposition. So no offensive holdings called against the Steelers' opponent through 4 weeks now. And also the borderline blasphemous offensive pass interference call against Claypool on a drive that could have won them the game, should have won them the game. The cornerback for the Eagles, whose name escapes me at the moment, he was falling down the entire play, and that one could have changed the game very easily. So I just find myself dissatisfied with the product, the NFL product that's being put out there right now due to these reasons, especially that OPI, which almost seemed made up at the moment.
Yeah, I can't really disagree with you there. And I would think also this isn't something that was surprising for Steeler fans or even NFL fans to experience in this game, because this has been an epidemic most of this season. And it's actually really been an issue the last couple years. It kind of makes you think fondly and almost humorously back when people were clamoring for these refs to get back to work because the replacement refs were ruining the game. And we go back to that Monday Night Football game between the Seahawks and the Packers years ago. But this has been a thing. Yeah, certainly pass interference, I think, has been an issue, especially going back to that NFC title game between the Saints and Rams, where the Saints did get screwed and the Rams went on to the Super Bowl losing to the Patriots. They then administered where pass interference can be reviewed. And to me, I never really liked that because it's a judgment call in the first place. So you're kind of reviewing a judgment call and whether or not it should have occurred. And it just seems like you're adding more cans of worms that don't need to be there. You're never going to get everything perfect, but it does appear now you're seeing reviews for something that wasn't called, and that's still taking long, and then you're feeling like the wrong call is still made. So it is still a bit of a mess in terms of officiating. I hate to be out here just complaining about referees. I mean, that kind of does come off like a fan instead of somebody covering the team. But the referees didn't have the greatest day at the office. I will say it's not unique to the Steelers. I mean, watching all of these teams' games, there are bad calls week after week, game after game. I don't know what can be done. I don't know. I highly doubt they're going to go back on a rule they just threw out there a year ago after so much controversy before that. I do feel like there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to add to that. I don't really love everything that can be replayed in all of sports. Sometimes it does take too long and takes away from the game a little bit. But there were a few bad calls. I will say, Matt, though, on the point of the officiating, and again, they didn't have the best day at the office. If the Steelers would have lost this game, to be clear, the Steelers, to me, would not have been able to blame the referees for this loss because, number one, they were playing a team that was banged up injury-wise. They were the better team then. They've been playing better then. They have more talent then. They played better and had a big lead in this game at one point. And we didn't mention this yet, but another criticism and a guy that would have been on the hook in addition to the defense and the refs if they would have lost this game, Eric Ebron. A guy that was signed in the offseason, and I had said, I feel like I was one of the early guys to say this, that could be one of the best offseason signings of the year for what they're paying him for that position, for his resume. I realized he was maybe a bit of a malcontent with Indianapolis, at least that's the rumors, but he's getting less than Jimmy Graham. He's getting less than a lot of other tight ends that are pass-catching tight ends that are older than him, that aren't as good as him. He can do it blocking-wise as well as being a pass-catching tight end. We've seen a lot of Vance McDonald being put more into this offense because Eric Ebron's there, because the Steelers want to involve, and Randy Fichtner said this, they want to involve two tight end sets as something they're going to be doing more frequently. They didn't feel they could do that really the last few years, certainly since Heath Miller retiring. So Eric Ebron has a chance to make a great impact, and did a couple weeks ago when they got that victory over Denver. But today, a rough day for him. A rough day for him to get involved. Maybe with Chase Claypool doing so much, he might have felt out of place. But that fumble late, he was just out of sorts. The other interception could have been on him more than Ben Roethlisberger, and he knew it. I'm sure you saw on the broadcast. He's holding his head with his hands. He did not have a good game, and you have to wonder what's going on in terms of practice, in terms of trying to work him into the offense. Is he frustrated? Is he not getting it? There's tons of hype around him. He has the talent, but it is rough, Matt. And I talked to former players in the offseason doing these shows in quarantine and trying to throw something at the wall here for Pittsburgh Sports Live when no games were being played, that it was going to be very, very, very difficult for not only rookies, which speaks to the greatness of Chase Claypool, but also even veteran players going to new teams to learn these plays and get involved right away this first quarter of the season. And most of the players that switch teams, including many believe the greatest quarterback of all time, are struggling early on here. Tom Brady made a boneheaded rookie move on Thursday night thinking it was fourth down when it was third down, and then he's trying to lie in the postgame press conference, and who knows what's going on there. Eric Ebron made a boneheaded mistake after boneheaded mistake in this game, and I hope it doesn't unravel based on any of the rumors with him with the Colts and how he handled things. I haven't experienced that yet with him. He's been a very, very nice guy, but I don't know if it's frustration with trying to be involved in this offense or what it is, but he had a rough day, and this game would have been on him in addition to the defense if they did not come out on top like they did, fortunately, to kind of get him off the hook.
The Steelers, you might have heard, are 4-0 for the first time since 1979. That guarantees they'll spend another week on top of the AFC North standings. They're 4-0. Baltimore's 4-1. Cleveland 3-1. Could be 3-2. Could be 4-1. They're playing the Colts right now. And Cincinnati at 1-3-1. Speaking of 1-3-1, Mike, that's the same record of your Philadelphia Eagles, who are in first place in the NFC East. Still, with a win percentage of 300, robust there. They're a half game up on Dallas. They're a full game up on Washington, and a game and a half up on New York. It's rather incredible. Last place in the AFC North would be good for first place in the NFC East. These things go in cycles, obviously, but I know that the Steelers have some more difficult matchups to come, but they'll also get to play the NFC East this year. So in that way, they'll have a couple more opportunities to beat up on some teams that I think objectively we can say are worse than they are. A game for offense today, Mike, but a couple of defensive heroes, at least on the Steelers side. Steven Nelson with a couple of interceptions. He stands out among the pack there. And not a great day for the pass rush, but you had 1.5 sacks for Stephon Tuitt. Mike Hilton got a sack. TJ Watt had a sack and 3 tackles for loss. Cam Hayward with a takedown of Carson Wentz. Bud Dupree with a half a sack and a couple of QB hits too. So there were moments when the Steelers got into Wentz's face, but not enough, I'm sure, for their liking. So we'll move on to the next matchup, the next game against Cleveland. A nice situation here also, Mike, early in the season for the Steelers now with that postponed game against the Titans. That now gives them 4 of their first 5 at home at Heinz Field, and also gives us a chance to talk about the fact that Governor Wolf's new loosened restrictions for sporting event attendance allowed about 7% of people to get into Heinz Field. I just had the attendance up, but there were actual people. Attendance was listed at 4,708 today at Heinz out of a possible 68,400. So about 10% give or take there. Actual real live Steelers fans were in attendance for the first time this year. Do you find it made a difference with the atmosphere at all?
I don't find it made a difference in terms of deciding the game one way or another, but it was really cool to see, honestly. It was a bit weird to see at first because we've experienced football games for so long now without fans in attendance. And unless you're watching Texas A&M, because that was kind of weird to see yesterday where they basically had a packed house. I don't know what's going on down there with COVID, but it was odd to see here in Pennsylvania to have fans there in a way. Honestly, that was my first initial reaction, but still driving down, parking, walking around. You didn't see any fans tailgating. You see fans walking to the game, but it was much more almost like a golf fan atmosphere. Nobody was rowdy. Nobody was crazy outside the stadium. I do think one of the cool parts, Matt, was you hear Renegade, you hear the Stone Cold Steve Austin theme song. You hear those regular songs and themes and get-up music they've been playing even without fans there, now with fans reacting to them. And when you hear Stone Cold's glass shattering, that did sound almost like a packed house with how excited those fans were. I don't know exactly. Yes, the number was 4,708 to be exact that was announced. I don't know if there were fans that were allowed to go or were planning on going that did not attend. That number was a bit lower than the expected number that could have reached 5,000. The governor would have allowed, I think, even a little bit more than that, maybe 5,500, I believe, something around that neighborhood. So it was a little lower than that. But regardless, it was cool to see fans there. They did get into the game. I feel like that occurred. But you weren't able to have an atmosphere that the fans were overpowering anything. You'd almost have to ask the 2 quarterbacks that question. But I don't feel like the fans decided the game. But hopefully more and more this continues. And I do think the fans being there for a rivalry game, a divisional game, might even be the engines revved up even further. And that is a Cleveland team that, while nobody wants to be scared of the Browns because of their history, it is a Cleveland team playing well. It is Baker Mayfield playing better than last year. He's finally not trying to do too much and make too many mistakes. And certainly a game the Steelers could be in jeopardy of losing if they do not play better.
What about the rushing game today, Mike? It took a backseat to Roethlisberger completing 27 of 34, passer rating well over 100, just getting sacked once, getting the ball out quickly, finding Chase Claypool. But, of course, you had the long run by Ray McLeod, the 58-yarder that led to the Steelers' second-to-last touchdown and put them in great position to win, which they eventually converted with great difficulty, as it turned out. But McLeod has shown a spark in the return game. He's shown a spark now in the run game. James Conner averaging just under 3 yards per rush today. So nothing spectacular there. He had some decent moments. Benny Snell got 7 carries. Claypool, McFarland, 3 carries apiece. So another diverse day for the rushing game. Do you think this might be just the formula for the rest of the year? You're going to see Conner get probably about half the rushes, and then the rest of the guys get opportunities sprinkled in here and there, because it does seem like they have a pretty diverse skill set, including Claypool, apparently, who can take a few handoffs, it looks like.
It does appear that way, and it's very hypocritical from what Tomlin always says and what he even said entering the season. So we're left to wonder, did he switch course based on how the year was going? We talked about this on past shows. James Conner's stats were good those first few games, and that included being injured and leaving week 1. But a lot of that was empty calories. A lot of that was late in games. A lot of that were just one big run, and the rest of it was 2 yards per carry. And then overall, it looked okay to me. And I've been saying this for a while. Many have said this too. Connor, to me, doesn't scream featured back, and he's been injured almost every year of his football life, and that has nothing to do with his cancer diagnosis. He's just not been able to get through seasons. Didn't get through the year last year after he was the featured back and was the ball toter, as Mike Tomlin likes to say. But all those carries for James Conner eventually got to him, and he ended up missing chunks of games, and it was definitely part of why they didn't make the postseason despite Ben's injuries with being so close. So I would imagine that it's going to be kind of Conner being the 1A, but there are definitely going to be other guys that are going to get their chances. Anthony McFarland is somebody, Matt, that I actually thought they would utilize even more today. I don't know if the game didn't dictate that, but he is a rookie. He is somebody that I actually did not advocate the Steelers to draft because I wanted them to trade for Leonard Fournette, a veteran, for this team to pair with James Conner. But Anthony McFarland has that burst. We saw that in the Denver game. He has that talent. He's looked great in practice. I would think that maybe we'll see more from him. The running game did not really get going in this game, besides that one run from Ray-May McCloud, of course. But I don't know if this game is indicative of how they're going to utilize the running game overall, but probably is indicative that Connor's not going to be getting 25 carries a game, which probably is the best recipe to win in terms of keeping him healthy, in terms of having each yard mean the most. Because to me, again, I don't feel like he is a Ezekiel Elliott type back that can be an MVP for you if you're going to win. And really, Matt, as much as maybe some Steelers fans hate hearing that, because he is such a nice guy, such a popular guy, and it's great that he is a member of the Steelers, it's not even that much of a criticism because he was a third-round pick, and many thought the Steelers reached to draft him when they did. So it's not like Conner hasn't had a successful career to this point, but I feel like this probably is the norm now, trying to figure out who else to mix with him, and whether it be McFarland or somebody else, or whether we'll see more of these college-type gimmicks, which include Chase Claypool.
30 minutes into our Pittsburgh Postgame Steelers edition. Steelers win at 38-29. I'm Matt Gajtka with Mike Asti coming to you from Heinz Field. Good opportunity to reset it a bit here and remind you that you can subscribe to Pittsburgh Sports Live, get notifications as well if you click the little bell next to the subscribe button at the bottom of the screen here, showing us yak on about the Steelers' latest win, now 4-0 on the season. Also, I want to bring in some of the folks commenting on our live chat. We have Dave Gormley again saying that Ebron has a role, hasn't found it yet maybe. Wes M comes to Eric Ebron's defense, saying that he can't help the fumbles caused by a helmet put on the ball, which is fair. It happens to the best of them. I'm not ready to call him Butterfingers or anything like that just yet. John Pennington has a thought on the running backs. He said Conner looks slow trying to run to the outside. I wouldn't disagree with that. And John also adds that McFarland, who has the speed to get to the outside, was on the bench. Go figure. Wes M. then chimes in with, it will be interesting to see if the Steelers re-sign Conner. That's obviously a few months down the road, but worthy of thought and a little bit of discussion here right now. They do have a lot of depth at running back. It looks like they do, at least right now. On the other hand, that's a position that can get attacked by the old attrition bug, the injury bug in football, the position that has the shortest lifespan in the NFL, pretty close to it at least. I think it might be right there with linemen as far as just getting beat up out there. And you know why. If you just watch a couple of plays, you see they're at the point of attack more often than not. So I hesitate to say they have a huge amount of depth when there's no real star power there. But at the same time, I get where Wes M. is coming from. Thanks again to all you folks leaving comments, including some of the not so nice ones. James Roberts and DH. DH asking, this guy drunk? I don't know who he's talking about, me or Mike. Mike, do I sound drunk to you?
I don't think you sound drunk. I'll tell you right now, I certainly am not drunk, or I wouldn't be allowed to be here. I think my press pass and credential might be revoked, and Heinz Field wouldn't be thrilled with me. I am very, very sober. I had a temperature check and everything, so I'm good to go. You, though, at your house, I don't know. Maybe you sipped on some brandy while you're watching the game before the show, but I don't think either one of us are intoxicated. And I did see a comment there about my headphones. Yeah, I'm trying to drown out all the noise, but it's not crazy. These are radio-style headphones.
I could be excused for having a few drinks with how my kids were misbehaving during the game, so I'll put it that way. But you know what? I powered through, and I focused for all you out there.
I appreciate that.
In PSL land. Hey, it's a nice escape for me. I'll say that much. Arslan Khan says, we saw today why Ryan Switzer didn't make the team. McLeod is a much more usable weapon. Well, yeah. Rushing from the line of scrimmage and possibly receiving a little bit more in the future, and you have the kick returns on top of that. So astute comment there from Mr. Khan, I would say. Mike, any other thoughts that you had? Because watching a game live, I love watching football live because you can see all 22 players at all times. The sideline view you get on TV, you don't see a lot. So did you find yourself noticing anything in game number 4 that you didn't in the first 3 just because you were there on site in the press box at Heinz Field?
Well, aside from, and a few colleagues and I noticed this, aside from the multicolor hats that some people were wearing there on the Steelers sidelines that I wasn't familiar with.
I saw that too. What was that about?
Yeah, well, we did some digging, and apparently there is a group that supports. At least we thought this is maybe for the hats, and they certainly the decals on the back of the end zones with different colors representing different, I guess, facets of cancer and different diseases.
Yeah.
So
the critical catch stuff. Yeah.
Okay. The critical catch. So the colors being blended together, I believe, was what the hats were signifying. But I didn't notice that before this week. I certainly didn't see that on TV. I'm assuming they were wearing that prior to just this week. Aside from that, though, again, I would have figured to see more from McFarland. I'm still kind of waiting for Hebron to emerge and really get part of this offense and have that true impact. This wasn't the best day for him. I'd expect them to keep on working at that. Chase Claypool wowed me. And again, I've been very, very high on him, as many are, and he's looked good this season. But I made a joke that for a while this looked like Chase Claypool versus Miles Sanders. I mean, that looked like the game. I mean, it was almost one of those respectful nod during a baseball broadcast where somebody might say the Red Sox 4, Mike Trout 2 or something, just to respect that he's kind of the individual leading the way. That appeared to be Chase Claypool early on in this game for the Steelers. He really had his coming out party to anyone nationally who wasn't aware of him. I was surprised, though, on how much, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, the Eagles were able to dice through the Steelers running. At least it appeared Miles Sanders was able to get those big runs early on, certainly. And the Steelers' run defense usually can stop that, even when they have been having issues in the secondary the last few years outside of takeaways. So it appeared more of Miles Sanders getting through to the Steelers' run defense than you would have thought would occur, at least here being in the press box. But I think the vantage point was relatively the same. Again, I feel like the Steelers are a legit contender this year. I do feel like they can vie for the division title. I feel like the playoffs should definitely happen. I feel like if they are not at least one of the wild cards, that would be a catastrophe with the way the season has started. And people need to bear in mind, they were only a game out last year without Ben Roethlisberger after week 2. That is a big deal. They did that with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. But there definitely are some kinks here in the armor in terms of winning that division, with the Ravens being in the division and still being one of the best teams in football, and then going onward to win a championship, which, despite the last couple of years of all the drama and then the injuries last year, this team has the talent to be a Super Bowl team. It's not crazy that some are making those sexy picks, but I did see a lot of the same problems. Still, secondary-wise, they rely on the turnovers way too much. It's almost like they're waiting for interception every play. That's not going to happen all the time. And the defensive line didn't seem to dominate as much as maybe they could. The teams were able to run against them, so that's a concern. But yeah, you can't really leave a game like this when the Steelers are 4-0 for the first time since 1979 and be picking it apart too much, at least instant reaction. This team won. They did enough to win. They are one of the better teams in football. And I think, Matt, which is what you said earlier that we've been saying throughout most of these shows, throughout really all my shows, whether they be post-game or otherwise, and throughout our coverage here at SteelersNow.com, as I throw out that nice little casual plug in the commentary, that this is still the 4th game for a professional team that is used to having 4 preseason games and several new players, whether they be veterans or rookies, who are a big part of this team. This team is more talented on paper than they were a year ago, but they need to learn plays. Tomlin's not going to play somebody or give somebody looks. Neither is Fichtner if they don't know the playbook. They're going to be scared to work them in. And they're going to see different issues that maybe are rising here in their fourth game in week 5 of the NFL season that maybe you wouldn't think would still be there by now, because maybe this is a little bit of a de facto preseason, even though in the first quarter for the Steelers.
Well, no doubt the Steelers are near lock to make the playoffs, especially, Mike, with the extra wild card team added this season in each conference. I think even under the old format with 12 teams getting in, 4-0 is as close to a cinch as you can get in terms of a start translating to a playoff berth. But as we know, Mike, around here, it's not about making the playoffs. It's not nearly enough. And, well, there is that level of urgency now with Ben Roethlisberger returning. You had the awareness of his mortality from a playing perspective, I would say, that has now entered the picture. That really wasn't a big part of things. I know he would casually toss around sometimes that he was going to retire, and then he would walk it back the next week on his radio show. But it's real now, because he was missing for most of last season. You got a glimpse of the post-Ben era, and it may not have been too pretty in terms of your perspective there. So there's that added to it. The fact that the defense was just so remarkable last season, kept them in the season until the final week. So I think we're all very fair and justified in having high standards for this team, regardless of whether there's a preseason, regardless of COVID, regardless of whether there are any fans in the stands or limited fans in the stands at Heinz Field, and regardless of whether the NFL officials aren't calling holding at all this year, apparently, against offenses. That's been a trend across the league. So I don't want to act like that's only the Steelers who are aggrieved here, but 4 games without a single one against the offense.
That's unbelievable, yes. Out of all the prop bets I would have made, that there would have at least been 1 through 4.
And actually, it doesn't even just mean passing plays. The Miles Sanders run, the 74-yard touchdown run by the Woody High product and former Penn Stater.
Yeah.
That one, you could argue that at least one holding was missed downfield on Terrell Edmonds. I know I had a couple folks in my Twitter account pop up and say, hey, that certainly should have been called back, or at least part of it should have been called back due to the fact there was a hold there. So it's not just passing, it's also rushing, and that could have played a role in the outcome of this game too. So that's why I get frustrated, Mike, when I hear that, well, they're just letting the players play. They're letting the players decide the game. You hear that in football, you hear it in hockey, you hear it in basketball occasionally. But whether you call it or don't call it, if you make the wrong call, you are in effect deciding the game as a referee.
and you don't, and I'd imagine the referees don't, and you don't want to see a referee decide the game, but I'd imagine the referees don't want to be known. That you don't want to have any referee. You don't want a Don F. and Dankinger line up for any referee. They don't want their name out there. But yeah, it's been rough. Maybe the refs are dealing with a little bit of a preseason fatigue as well. I don't know, but it's the old adage that it's not holding unless the referees call it, because there's holding on every play. While that holds true, there does need to be holding called occasionally, because as we know, there is holding on every play. So you can't just let it go 100% of the time. At some point, there does need to be a holding call, and you would figure there would be one. But the Steelers are not going to be on the long list of teams complaining, I'd imagine. And Mike Tomlin, I'm sure, not going to want to talk about this, because they are 4-0. That is certainly uncommon. It's still a wow, mind-blowing fact out there with the success of this franchise, win or lose, in terms of championships. And the fans have gone through maybe a period where they feel like they were underachieving and they lost some playoff games they shouldn't have lost, but immaterial. They've won championships. They've been a contender for so long, even since 79, and this is the first 4-0 start since 79. Just remarkable to think about, really.
Mike, my last thing for you is, how long can the Steelers continue this unbeaten streak, as they are going to go for 5-0 next weekend, next Sunday, another 1 p.m. start. We're having these 1 p.m. starts rattle off. We have at least 3 more in a row, pending any kind of COVID adjustments. And I liked how on the broadcast, when the Fox crew noted which games were coming up today and next week, there was a little disclaimer that said times and stations are subject to change. So well, we all know that. But at least at this point, Mike, we're looking at Cleveland, then at Tennessee, at Baltimore, and at Dallas. That'll get us halfway through the season. Do the Steelers get it up to 8-0, or do they stumble once or twice or many more times than that in the upcoming second quarter of the schedule, if you will?
Well, the crazy thing is, Matt, and this does sound crazy, because the National Football League, no matter how much you're a contender, you're going to lose games. You're not going to go undefeated. And the Steelers certainly in years past have lost games they otherwise should not lose. They got a scare to the Broncos. They got a scare even today through the Philadelphia Eagles. But looking at this schedule, And you figure they're going to play that Tennessee game despite another positive test by somebody just around the facility today. So that
maybe they don't play that one. Who knows?
Yeah, then there might be another bye if the Titans have to void the season or whatever ends up occurring. Cleveland certainly could be a rough one because they are playing well, even though you figure at home the Steelers would be favored, even with only 5,000 fans being there. The Ravens are one of the best teams in football, so that's certainly up in the air. And Dallas is a really, really good and talented team, but they've been underachieving. They haven't been playing well. They make tons of mistakes. They're kind of like the Steelers who have tons of talent. They play well, but they make mistakes occasionally, and the Cowboys have those mistakes cost them games. So they aren't playing that well. After that, Bengals, Jacksonville gets very winnable, and then even after that Ravens game, the Washington football team, Buffalo, and Buffalo's they're a good team, but it's not a murderer's row out there, man, I guess is where I'm going with this. It's not an incredibly tough schedule. There's certainly winnable games there. I would imagine that if the Steelers finish this season with any more than 4 losses, they went off the rails. I mean, 4 or 5 at the most. I'm not going to say they're going to go undefeated. I would imagine that either the Cleveland or Ravens game, they're going to lose one of those. I do think they're going to split the Ravens season series, so one of those would be a loss. Dallas could definitely beat them. Cincinnati and Jacksonville, you have to chalk those both up as wins. But this is a team that shouldn't lose more than 4. They certainly should be a contender for not only the playoffs but a division title. And I would think, Matt, with their 4-0 start and with the talent on this team, and I'm sure fans with that high standard would agree, that if this team only squeaks into the postseason, thanks to that extra expanded wildcard spot, which they would have got in last year if that existed last season, that would mean they played a lot worse at the end of this season and things went off the rails a little bit. That would mean they probably have lost 4 or 5 games out of the rest of these games, and maybe even more, maybe 6 or 7, and that's not good, obviously. So when you have a 4-0 start, you should finish with at least 11 or 12 wins with this talent. If they end up with only 9 or 10, they're not going to win the division, and that means that things went awry. But I see no reason why they don't win, because as much as we're picking on mistakes and saying there's weaknesses here, there's been sloppy football and a lot of mistakes and a lot of weaknesses for some really, really good teams this year more than any other. Everything we're saying about the Steelers and the preseason and shaking off the kinks, it's been going on all across the National Football League. So based on the standard of the league, they are one of the best teams in football.
As a certain head coach likes to say, the standard is the standard, but with the 4-0 start, Mike, the standard has been raised. And I think it's fair to say that
for that one.
It could be top of the AFC or bust right now for a team that already had those high expectations, higher than usual, just based on the tradition of the franchise. And then you add in the fact of the high level of talent. And a guy like Chase Claypool with 4 touchdowns today,
unbelievable,
breaking out, that's only going to amp things up. So we're looking forward to more Steelers excitement here this season in 2020. We could all use some good old-fashioned sports excitement. I know that much with all that's going on around the rest of the world. Thank you to all of you who've been watching our Steelers post games. They're going to continue in earnest here as, like I said, we're heading into the second quarter of the 16-game schedule. For Mike Asti, live from Heinz Field, I'm Matt Gajtka in my home studio here in Westview, Pennsylvania, saying God bless, have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you next Sunday for Steelers postgame after they take on the hated and improved Cleveland Browns. See you then.